The stagecoach hit another rut, and Clara Whitmore's head cracked against the wooden frame hard enough to see stars. She didn't complain. The three other passengers, a mining contractor, a preacher's wife, and a young man in an expensive coat, had already made it clear they'd rather she kept quiet. The contractor had moved seats within 5 minutes of departure. The preacher's wife had pulled her skirts away like Clara carried plague. The young man just stared out the window, but his jaw was tight, his posture screaming discomfort. Clara knew what they saw. A woman past 30, big-boned and heavy in all the ways society punished. Hands too rough, dress too plain, face too honest. She'd stopped trying to make herself smaller years ago, but that didn't mean the stares didn't cut. The stagecoach driver shouted something unintelligible, and the vehicle lurched to a stop. Clara peered through the grimy window at Ash Hollow, Wyoming territory, and felt her stomach drop. It looked like the kind of place Hope went to die. The main street was unpaved mud, rutted deep from wagon wheels and spring runoff. Buildings sagged against each other like drunks holding each other upright. A saloon with a busted sign, a general store with bars on the windows, a hotel that looked one strong wind away from collapse. Men loitered outside every doorway, hard-eyed and sunburned, watching the stagecoach with the bored menace of predators, deciding whether something was worth chasing. This was it, the town where Uncle James lived, the last blood relative who might help her. Clara climbed down from the stagecoach, her worn boots hitting the mud with a wet slap. Immediately, she felt the weight of attention shift toward her. Conversation stopped. Eyes narrowed. A woman sweeping the porch of the general store actually froze mid-motion, staring. "Jesus Christ," someone muttered. "Look at the size of her." Clara's face burned, but she kept her chin up. She'd heard worse. She'd survived worse. The stagecoach driver hauled her single battered trunk down and dropped it in the mud without ceremony. "Good luck, miss," he said, but his tone suggested he thought she'd need a hell of a lot more than luck. The stage rolled away, leaving her standing alone in the center of town with mud soaking through her boots and every pair of eyes drilling into her back. She needed to find Uncle James, now. The general store seemed like the logical place to ask, so Clara grabbed her trunk and hauled it across the street, ignoring the way her arms shook under the weight. A couple of men loitering outside the saloon started laughing. "Damn, she's built like a plow horse," one said, loud enough to make sure she heard. "Probably work like one too," another added, and they all laughed harder. Clara's fingers tightened on the trunk handle, but she didn't stop, didn't turn, didn't give them the satisfaction. Inside the general store, the air smelled like flour and old tobacco. A thin man behind the counter looked up from his ledger, and his expression went from neutral to vaguely disgusted in the span of a heartbeat. "Help you?" he asked, tone flat. "I'm looking for James Whitmore," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm his niece. He should be expecting me." The storekeeper's eyebrows shot up. "You're James Whitmore's niece?" "Yes." He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a low whistle. "Well, that explains some things." Clara's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. He's got a place about a mile north of here. Follow the main road till you hit the fork, then go left. Can't miss it." "Thank you." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Miss Whitmore?" Clara looked back. The storekeeper's expression was somewhere between pity and amusement. "If I were you, I wouldn't get my hopes up." The warning sat heavy in her chest as she dragged her trunk back outside. 1 mile north. She could walk that. She'd walked farther with less at stake. The road was worse than it looked. Mud sucked at her boots with every step, and the trunk's weight made her shoulders scream within the first 100 yards. Sweat soaked through her dress despite the cool mountain air. Twice, she had to stop and rest, setting the trunk down and bracing her hands on her knees while she caught her breath. Both times, men on horseback passed by. Neither offered help. One spat tobacco juice in her direction. By the time she reached the fork in the road, her hands were blistered and her lungs burned. But Uncle James's house was just ahead, a small, neat cabin with a vegetable garden and a barn that looked recently painted. Relief flooded through her. She was here. She'd made it. Clara dragged the trunk up to the front door and knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, harder. "Uncle James? It's Clara. Clara Whitmore. I wrote you about coming." Still nothing. She tried the door, unlocked. She pushed it open slowly. Uncle James? The cabin was empty, but clearly lived in. A fire burned low in the hearth. Dishes sat drying beside the wash basin. A coat hung on a peg by the door. Clara set her trunk down just inside and sank into a chair, her whole body trembling with exhaustion. He'd be back soon. He had to be. She'd written him 3 weeks ago, told him she was coming, told him she had nowhere else to go after her father died and left nothing but debts. He'd never written back, but she'd convinced herself that meant he was fine with her coming. That family would help family. She waited. An hour passed, then 2. The door finally opened just as the sun was starting to sink toward the mountains. A man stepped inside, tall, lean, weathered in the way of men who worked outdoors. He had the same sharp nose as Clara's father, the same thin mouth. Uncle James. He stopped dead when he saw her, his expression going from surprise to something darker. Something that looked almost like shame. "Clara," he said quietly. She stood up quickly, trying to smile. "Uncle James, I'm so sorry I let myself in. I knocked, but no one answered, and You shouldn't have come." The words hit her like a slap. I wrote you," Clara said, hating the way her voice shook. "I told you I was coming. After Father died, I didn't have anywhere else to—" "I know what you wrote." Uncle James closed the door behind him and didn't move any closer. "I didn't answer because I was hoping you'd take the hint." Clara felt the floor tilt under her feet. "I don't understand." "Look at you, Clara." His voice was hard, flat. "You think I can help you here? You think any man in this town is going to want you? You think I want people knowing we're related?" Each word was a knife. Clara opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Uncle James rubbed a hand over his face. "Your father was a fool and a drunk, and he died the same way. I got out of that family as fast as I could, and I built something here. A reputation, respect, and now you show up looking like that. Expecting me to what? Take care of you? Introduce you around?" "I don't need you to introduce me," Clara managed. "I just need a place to stay until I can find work. I can clean, I can cook, I can—" "There's no work here for a woman like you." Uncle James crossed his arms. "The respectable women in this town won't hire you because you'll make them look bad. The men won't hire you because, well, you're not the kind of woman men hire for respectable work." The implication settled over her like ice water. "I see." Clara's voice came out flat, dead. "So what am I supposed to do?" Uncle James looked away. "I don't know, but you can't stay here. I have $3 to my name. Not my problem. I'm your niece. You're a stranger who shares my last name, and that's the only reason I'm being civil right now." Uncle James moved past her and opened the door. "There's a boarding house in town. Maybe they'll take you for a few nights. After that," he shrugged. "You're a grown woman. Figure it out." Clara stared at him. This man who shared her blood, who she'd traveled 2,000 miles to find, who was throwing her out like garbage. She wanted to scream, to beg, to cry. Instead, she picked up her trunk. "Goodbye, Uncle James," she said quietly. He didn't respond. Clara walked back down that mile-long road in the gathering dark, her trunk feeling twice as heavy as before. By the time she reached the boarding house, her hands were bleeding through the blisters, and her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. The boarding house was run by a pinch-faced woman named Mrs. Talbot, who looked Clara up and down like she was appraising livestock. $3 a week, Mrs. Talbot said. Meals not included. No men in the rooms. No noise after 9. Clara nodded and handed over all the money she had. Mrs. Talbot counted it slowly, then handed back $2. "First week. Rooms upstairs, last door on the left. Don't expect me to carry your trunk." The room was barely bigger than a closet. A narrow bed, a cracked wash basin, and a single window that looked out over the alley. But it was a roof. It was something. Claire collapsed onto the bed and finally let herself cry. She'd never felt more alone in her life. The next morning, Clara woke to hunger gnawing at her stomach. She had $2 left. No food, no prospects. She needed work. Immediately. She washed her face in the cold water from the basin, put on her only other dress, the one that was slightly less travel-stained, and went downstairs. Mrs. Talbot was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with sharp, efficient movements. "Excuse me," Clara said. "I'm looking for work. Do you know anyone who might be hiring?" Mrs. Talbot didn't look up. "What can you do?" "I can cook, clean, sew, keep accounts." "Can you do it better than the women already here?" Clara hesitated. Mrs. Talbot snorted. "Didn't think so. This town's got more women than jobs as it is. Only work for someone like you would be—" She trailed off meaningfully. Clara's face burned. "I'm not interested in that kind of work." "Then I don't know what to tell you." Mrs. Talbot shaped the dough into a loaf and set it aside. "Maybe try the saloon. They need someone to scrub floors sometimes." The saloon. Clara swallowed her pride and nodded. "Thank you." The saloon wasn't open yet, but the door was unlocked. Inside it smelled like stale beer and vomit. A man was sweeping broken glass into a pile, big, bearded, with a scar running down one side of his face. He looked up when Clara entered. "We're closed." "I know, I'm looking for work." "I heard you might need someone to clean." The man leaned on his broom and looked her over, not with the disgust she'd seen from others, but with a kind of pragmatic assessment. "You done this kind of work before?" "No, but I'm a fast learner, and I work hard," he grunted. "Name's Dutch. I run this place. I'll give you a trial. Clean the whole floor, scrub the tables, empty the spittoons. If you do a good job, I'll pay you 50 cents and we'll talk about regular work." 50 cents. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Deal," Clara said. Dutch tossed her a rag. "Buckets out back. Get to it." Clara worked for 3 hours straight, scrubbing until her back screamed and her knees were raw. The floor was sticky with dried alcohol and God knew what else. The spittoons made her gag. The tables were carved with obscenities and stained with things she didn't want to identify. But she didn't stop, didn't complain, didn't slow down. When Dutch came back to inspect, he walked the whole floor, checking corners, running a finger along the tables. Finally, he nodded. "Not bad." He handed her 50 cents. Clara stared at the 2 coins in her palm. 2 days of food. Maybe 3 if she was careful. "Can I come back tomorrow?" she asked. Dutch scratched his beard. "I'll level with you. I don't need daily cleaning, maybe twice a week, and even then, I can't pay more than 50 cents each time." $1 a week. It wasn't enough. Not even close. "I understand," Clara said quietly. "Thank you for the opportunity." She spent the rest of the day knocking on every door in Ash Hollow. The general store, the butcher, the seamstress, the hotel, the bakery. Every single one turned her away. Most didn't even let her finish her pitch. They took one look at her and said no. A few were crueler about it. The seamstress, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Brennan, actually laughed. "Honey," Mrs. Brennan said, "I run a business that depends on making women feel beautiful. You think having you around is going to help with that?" By sunset, Clara was back in her tiny room with 50 cents, a growling stomach, and no prospects. She bought a loaf of bread from the general store and ate half of it dry, saving the rest for tomorrow. This couldn't last. She knew it couldn't last. 1 week. That's all the time she had before Mrs. Talbot would demand another $3 she didn't have. Clara lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, and tried not to think about what happened to women with no money and no options in towns like this. Pamades. The answer came 3 days later, and it came from the last person Clara expected. She was sweeping the saloon floor, her second job that week, when Dutch called her over to the bar. "Got a question for you," he said, polishing a glass. "You know how to ride?" Clara blinked. "A horse?" "No, a damn buffalo. Yes, a horse." I've ridden before. Not often, but I know how." Dutch set down the glass. "There's a man who lives up in the mountains, name's Rowan Mercer, keeps to himself. Used to come down for supplies once a month, but his leg got busted up last winter and he can't make the trip anymore. He's been sending word he needs someone to bring supplies up to him. Pays $5 a trip." $5? Clara's heart jumped. That's good money." "It's dangerous money," Dutch corrected. "The trail up there is narrow as hell. One wrong step and you're dead at the bottom of a ravine. Plus, Mercer's not exactly welcoming. Most folks around here are scared of him." "Why?" Dutch shrugged. "He came here about 8 years back with a wife and a baby. Wife died in childbirth along with the kid. Mercer went half crazy with grief, beat the hell out of the doctor, then disappeared into the mountains. Comes down maybe once a month for supplies, doesn't talk to anyone, doesn't cause trouble. But people say he's dangerous, violent, not right in the head. Clara absorbed this. And no one else will take the job? Everyone else has better options. Dutch looked at her directly. You don't. It wasn't cruel. It was just true. What would I have to do? Mercer left a list and money with me. You'd pick up the supplies, load them on a mule, ride up to his cabin, drop everything off, and ride back. Probably takes a full day, maybe more if the weather's bad. $5 per trip. He needs someone once a week. Once a week. $20 a month. It was more money than she'd ever imagined having. Why are you offering this to me? Clara asked quietly. Dutch was silent for a moment, then, because you work hard and you don't complain, and because I figure you deserve a chance to survive this place. It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her since she'd arrived. Clara straightened her shoulders. I'll do it. Dutch nodded slowly. Mercer's expecting someone this Saturday. I'll have the supplies ready. You come by at first light, and I'll show you the trail. Saturday morning came cold and gray. Clara woke before dawn, her stomach tight with nerves. She dressed in her most practical clothing, a split skirt she'd sewn years ago for farm work, a heavy wool shirt, her sturdy boots. She braided her hair back tight and wrapped a scarf around her neck. When she arrived at the saloon, Dutch was already outside with a mule loaded down with supplies. Flour, coffee, dried meat, ammunition, tobacco, salt, sugar. Everything tied down with expert precision. This is Molly, Dutch said, patting the mule. She knows the trail. Let her set the pace and don't try to rush her. Clara took the lead rope. Molly eyed her with the profound skepticism of all mules. The trail starts about 2 miles north, Dutch continued. You'll see the marker. A pile of rocks with a red cloth tied to a stick. From there, just follow the path. It's going to get narrow and steep. Don't look down. Don't stop unless you absolutely have to. And when you get to Mercer's cabin, don't try to be friendly. Just drop the supplies and go. Clara nodded, trying to memorize everything. Dutch handed her a rifle. Take this. You probably won't need it, but probably isn't the same as definitely. The weight of the gun in her hands felt both terrifying and reassuring. Thank you, Clara said, for everything. Dutch grunted. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you make it back alive. Clara led Molly out of town, ignoring the stares and whispers. Let them talk. Let them think whatever they wanted. She was done caring what Ash Hollow thought of her. The first 2 miles were easy. Flat ground, wide path, nothing to worry about. But when she reached the marker, Clara understood why no one else wanted this job. The trail was barely a trail at all. A narrow strip of dirt clinging to the side of a mountain, with a sheer cliff wall on one side and a drop into nothing on the other. The path twisted and climbed, disappearing around corners she couldn't see past. Clara took a deep breath. She'd come this far. She wasn't turning back now. She clicked her tongue, and Molly started forward. The next 3 hours were the most terrifying of Clara's life. The path was so narrow in places that her shoulder brushed the cliff wall, while Molly's hooves sent loose stones skittering over the edge. The drop was so steep Clara couldn't see the bottom. Wind whipped through the canyon, strong enough to make her sway. Twice, Molly stopped dead, refusing to move forward until Clara dismounted and led her past particularly dangerous sections on foot. Once, the path curved around a boulder so tight that Clara had to press herself flat against the rock to squeeze through. Her legs shook. Her hands cramped around the lead rope. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. But she kept going. Finally, the trail leveled out into a small clearing, and there, tucked against the tree line with mountains rising behind it, was a cabin. It was small but solid, well built. Smoke rose from the chimney. A lean-to beside the cabin sheltered a stack of firewood and what looked like animal pelts stretched on frames. Clara tied Molly to a post and approached the door on shaking legs. She knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. Mr. Mercer? I've brought your supplies. The door opened. The man standing there was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar, and a beard that hadn't seen a razor in months. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they looked at Clara with the wary intensity of a wolf deciding whether something was a threat. Who are you? His voice was rough from disuse. Clara Whitmore, Dutch sent me. I have your supplies. Rowan Mercer looked past her to where Molly stood loaded down with goods. His expression didn't change. Where's Ben? I don't know who that is. The man who usually brings supplies. I don't know. Dutch said you needed someone, so I volunteered. Mercer's eyes moved back to her, scanning her face, her clothes, her hands. Not with the disgust or pity she was used to, just looking, assessing. You rode up here alone? He asked. Yes. First time? Yes. Something that might have been surprise flickered across his face. That trail kills people. I noticed. A pause. Then, start unloading. I'll help. Together they carried the supplies inside. The cabin was sparse but clean. A bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs, shelves lined with books and tools. Everything organized with military precision. When the last sack was inside, Mercer pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket and counted out $5 in coins. He held them out. Clara took them, the weight solid and real in her palm. You coming back next week? Mercer asked. Clara met his eyes. Yes. He nodded once. Be careful on the way down. Trail's more dangerous going down than coming up. It was dismissal and warning both. Clara pocketed the money and walked back to Molly. She'd made it halfway across the clearing when his voice stopped her. Miss Whitmore. She turned. Rowan Mercer stood in his doorway, backlit by the fire inside. You did good. 3 words, simple, direct, but they hit Clara harder than anything anyone had said in weeks, because they weren't pity. They weren't charity. They were respect. Thank you, Clara said quietly. The ride back down the mountain was just as terrifying as the ride up, but Clara barely noticed. Her pocket was heavy with coins. Her chest was warm with something she'd almost forgotten. Pride. She'd done it. She'd taken the job no one else would take, survived the trail everyone feared, and earned $5 in a single day. When she rode back into Ash Hollow as the sun was setting, people stared. She stared back. Let them look. She was just getting started. Over the next 3 weeks, Clara made the mountain trip 4 times. Each journey was brutal. Her thighs ached from gripping the saddle, her shoulders screamed from hauling supplies, and her hands developed calluses on top of blisters. But each time she came back down that mountain with $5 in her pocket, and each time the town's whispers grew louder. The 4th trip was different. Clara arrived at Rowan's cabin with Molly loaded heavier than usual. Dutch had added an extra sack of flour and a crate of ammunition. The sky was threatening rain, dark clouds rolling in from the west, and Clara wanted to unload quickly and get back down the mountain before the trail turned to mud. Rowan met her at the door like always, silent and efficient. They worked in their usual rhythm, Clara hauling sacks from the mule, Rowan taking them inside and stacking them with precise care. They didn't talk. They never talked beyond the bare necessities. But this time, as Clara reached for the last crate, her boot caught on a root. She stumbled, and the crate slipped from her grip, hitting the ground hard. The wood split, and ammunition scattered across the dirt. Damn it, Clara muttered, dropping to her knees to gather the scattered bullets. Rowan crouched beside her without a word, helping collect them. His hands moved fast, scarred and capable, scooping bullets back into the broken crate. I'm sorry, Clara said. I'll pay for the damaged crate. Don't worry about it. They worked in silence for a moment, then Rowan said, You're limping. Clara froze. She'd thought she was hiding it well enough. I'm fine. Your left leg. You've been favoring it since you got here. It's nothing, just sore from the ride. Rowan sat back on his heels, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. When did you hurt it? 2 days ago. Molly spooked at something on the trail and I had to grab the cliff wall to keep from going over. Scraped it up pretty bad, but it's healing. Let me see. It's fine, really. Miss Whitmore. His voice was flat, brooking no argument. You ride that trail alone. If your leg gets infected and you can't ride, you die. Let me see it. Clara hesitated, then slowly pulled up the hem of her split skirt. The gash ran from her knee to mid-calf, angry red at the edges where dirt had gotten into it. She'd cleaned it as best she could, but it was clearly inflamed. Rowan's jaw tightened. Come inside. I need to get back before the rain. You need to get that cleaned properly before it kills you. Inside. Now. Clara had learned not to argue with that tone. She followed him into the cabin. Rowan gestured to one of the chairs. Sit. While Clara sat, he moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, gathering supplies. A basin of water, clean cloth, a bottle of something that looked medicinal. He set everything on the table, pulled the other chair over, and sat down in front of her. This is going to hurt, he said. I figured. He wasn't lying. The moment the cloth touched her leg, Clara's breath hissed through her teeth. Rowan cleaned the wound with methodical care, his touch surprisingly gentle for hands that looked like they could break rocks. When he poured the medicinal alcohol over the gash, Clara gripped the edge of the chair hard enough to make the wood creak. You should have cleaned this properly the first time, Rowan said, wrapping her leg with clean bandages. I did clean it. Not well enough. He tied off the bandage and sat back. You need to be more careful. Clara met his eyes. I am careful, but careful doesn't mean much when the trail is barely wide enough for a mule and the wind wants to knock you off. Then maybe you shouldn't be riding it. Maybe I don't have a choice. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. Why don't you? He asked quietly. Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want the whole sad story? If you're willing to tell it. She didn't know why she started talking. Maybe because he'd asked like he actually wanted to know. Maybe because he'd bandaged her leg without judgment or pity. Maybe because she was tired of carrying it all alone. So she told him about her father dying and leaving nothing but debts, about traveling to Ash Hollow to find her uncle, about James Whitmore slamming the door in her face, about having $3 and a week to live before she'd end up on the street, or worse. Rowan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Your uncle's an ass, he said finally. Despite everything, Clara smiled. Yeah, he is. The town's not much better. No. Rowan stood and moved to the stove, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. He handed her one and leaned against the table. How long are you planning to keep this up? The supply runs, as long as you need someone. It's dangerous work. Everything's dangerous when you're desperate. He studied her over the rim of his cup. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who'd quit after the first trip, or fall off the mountain trying. He paused. You're tougher than you look. Coming from anyone else, it might have been an insult. From Rowan Mercer, it sounded like respect. I've had practice, Clara said. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Rowan glanced toward the window where rain had started to fall in heavy sheets. You're not riding down in this, he said. I'll be fine. That trail turns into a death trap when it's wet. You stay here until it clears. Clara wanted to argue, but looking at the rain hammering against the window, she knew he was right. I don't want to impose. You're not. I've got supplies to organize anyway. He gestured to the corner where she'd stacked everything. You can help if you want something to do. They worked through the afternoon in comfortable silence, organizing flour and coffee and ammunition while rain battered the roof. It was strange, Clara thought, how easy it was to be around him. No small talk, no forced pleasantries, just 2 people working side by side, and somehow that felt more honest than any conversation she'd had in Ash Hollow. The rain didn't let up until evening. By then, the light was fading and the temperature had dropped. Too late to ride now, Rowan said, looking out at the darkening sky. You'll stay the night. Clara's stomach tightened, not from fear. She wasn't afraid of Rowan, but from what people would say if they knew she'd spent the night in his cabin. Rowan seemed to read her thoughts. I'll sleep outside in the lean-to. You take the bed. You don't have to, Yes, I do. Not because I don't trust myself. Because I know what this town will say if word gets out you were here overnight, and I'm not giving them ammunition to destroy you with. The casual certainty in his voice, like her reputation mattered, like protecting it was obvious, made Clara's chest tighten. Thank you, she said quietly. That night, Clara lay in Rowan's bed while he slept outside in the cold, and tried to remember the last time someone had protected her without wanting something in return. She couldn't. The next morning, Clara rode back down the mountain with more than just money in her pocket. She had something harder to define. A connection, maybe. Or just the knowledge that somewhere in this brutal territory, There was one person who saw her as more than a burden or a joke. But Ash Hollow didn't care about connections. It cared about gossip. Clara was unloading supplies from Molly outside the saloon when she heard the voices. "Did you see her come back this morning, still wearing yesterday's clothes?" "I heard she didn't come back at all last night." "Well, we all know what that means." Clara's hands stilled on the supply rope. Two women stood outside the general store, making no effort to lower their voices. One was Mrs. Brennan, the seamstress who'd laughed in her face. The other was a younger woman Clara didn't recognize, pretty in a sharp-edged way. "I'm telling you, Margaret, she's selling herself to that mountain man," Mrs. Brennan said. "Why else would she keep going up there?" $5 says she's already pregnant," Margaret replied. "Give it 2 months and we'll know for sure." Heat flooded Clara's face. She wanted to march over there and tell them the truth, that she'd been caught in a storm, that Rowan had slept outside, that nothing had happened, but she knew it wouldn't matter. They'd already decided what kind of woman she was. "Let them talk," Dutch said from the saloon doorway. "They're just jealous you found work, and they're stuck being miserable for free." Clara forced a smile. "I'm fine." But she wasn't fine, and it got worse. Over the next 2 weeks, the whispers followed her everywhere. Women crossed the street to avoid her. Men made crude suggestions when she passed. Someone threw a rock through her boarding house window with a note that read, "Whore." Mrs. Talbot started charging her extra for the damage to the house's reputation. The price went from $3 a week to $5. Clara paid it because she had no choice. But the worst came on a Tuesday afternoon when Clara was walking back from the general store with a sack of flour. 3 men stepped out of the alley, blocking her path. She recognized them. Ranch hands from one of the spreads outside town. Young, drunk at 3 in the afternoon, looking for entertainment. "Well, look who it is," the tallest one said, grinning. "The mountain man's whore." Clara's grip tightened on the flour sack. "Excuse me." She tried to walk around them, but they moved to block her again. "Don't be unfriendly," another one said. "We just want to talk." "I'm not interested in talking." "Oh, but you talk to Mercer, don't you?" The tall one stepped closer. "Heard you spend real quality time with him. So we were thinking if you're charging him $5, maybe you'd give us a discount, being neighborly and all." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. The street wasn't empty. There were people around, watching, but no one was moving to help. "Get out of my way," Clara said, putting steel in her voice. "Make us." The tall one reached for her arm. Clara swung the flour sack hard, catching him in the face. He stumbled back, cursing, and she ran. She made it maybe 10 steps before hands grabbed her from behind, yanking her into the alley. The flour sack hit the ground and burst, white powder exploding across the dirt. "You stupid bitch!" A fist caught her in the stomach, driving the air from her lungs. Clara doubled over, gasping, and someone shoved her against the wall hard enough to rattle her teeth. "Thought you could hit me and run." The tall one's face was red, flour dusting his hair. "We're going to teach you some manners." "Let her go." The voice was quiet, deadly. Everyone froze. Rowan Mercer stood at the alley entrance. Clara didn't know how he'd gotten there or why he was in town, but relief flooded through her so strong it made her dizzy. The tall ranch hand sneered. "This ain't your business, Mercer." "Yes, it is. She's just a—" Rowan moved so fast Clara almost missed it. 1 second he was standing at the alley entrance. The next his fist connected with the tall man's jaw with a crack that echoed off the walls. The ranch hand dropped like a stone. The other 2 scrambled backward, hands raised. "We didn't mean nothing," one stammered. "We were just—" "Get out!" They ran. Rowan turned to Clara, his expression unreadable. "You hurt?" Clara pushed herself off the wall, trying to steady her breathing. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." She touched her lip and her fingers came away red. "It's nothing." "Come on." He led her out of the alley, his hand on her elbow, not pulling, just steadying. The street had filled with people now, all watching, all whispering. Rowan ignored them completely. He walked Clara to the boarding house, his presence a wall between her and the staring crowd. At the door, he stopped. "You need to be more careful." "I was just buying flour." "I know, but this town is getting worse." His jaw was tight. "They're scared of me, but they're not scared enough, and you're an easy target." Clara looked up at him. "Why did you come down today?" "Needed a few things. Got here in time to hear those bastards talking about you outside the saloon. His eyes were hard. Decided to make sure you got home safe. Something warm unfurled in Clara's chest. Thank you. Rowan nodded once, then turned to leave. Mr. Mercer? He looked back. When's the next supply run? Saturday. But maybe you should Shh. I'll be there, Clara said firmly. Same as always. For the first time since she'd met him, Rowan Mercer almost smiled. Saturday, then. He walked away and Clara went inside, ignoring Mrs. Talbot's disapproving stare. That night, lying in bed with her split lip throbbing, Clara made a decision. This town wanted to tear her apart. They wanted her broken, desperate, willing to do anything to survive. They wanted her to prove them right about what kind of woman she was. But she wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. She'd keep riding that mountain, keep earning her money, keep surviving. And if that made her the town whore in their eyes, then so be it. She'd been called worse things by better people. Saturday came and Clara rode up the mountain like always. But this time, when she arrived at the cabin, Rowan had something waiting for her besides the usual payment, a rifle. It's for you, he said, holding it out. Lighter than the one Dutch loaned you, easier to handle. Clara stared at the weapon. I can't accept this. You can, and you will. That trail's dangerous, and you're riding it alone. You need a gun that actually fits you. Mr. Mercer, Rowan, he said. Just Rowan. Clara took the rifle carefully. It was beautiful. Well-maintained, the wood polished smooth. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just learn to shoot it properly. He gestured toward the clearing. Come on, we've got a couple hours before you need to head back. For the next 2 hours, Rowan taught Clara to shoot. Not the basics, she already knew those, but the real skills. How to compensate for wind, how to lead a moving target, how to reload fast under pressure. He was a good teacher, patient, clear, no condescension. When Clara missed, he showed her why. When she hit, he nodded approval and moved to the next lesson. By the time the sun started its descent, Clara could hit a target at 50 yards more often than not. You're a natural, Rowan said, loading the rifle's chamber. Better than most men I've known. I had good motivation. My father taught me when I was young, before... She trailed off. Before what? Before he decided I wasn't worth the effort. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Fathers can be bastards. Was yours? Worse than a bastard. He was a coward. Rowan handed her the reloaded rifle. But that's a story for another day. Clara wanted to press, but something in his expression stopped her. Instead, she said, Thank you. For the rifle, for the lessons, for everything. You've earned it. Rowan looked toward the trail. You should get going. Light's fading. Clara secured the rifle to her saddle and swung up onto Molly. Before she left, she turned back. Rowan? Yeah? Why are you helping me? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because everyone in that town sees you and decides what you're worth in about 5 seconds. But I watched you ride that trail 4 times without quitting. I watched you work harder than anyone I've ever met. And I figure someone who fights that hard deserves a fighting chance. Clara's throat tightened. I won't let you down. I know you won't. She rode down the mountain with the rifle across her lap and something that felt dangerously close to hope in her chest. But hope in Ash Hollow was a fragile thing. The rumors reached a fever pitch after people saw Rowan in town defending her. Now it wasn't just whispers. It was open hostility. Someone painted whore on the side of the boarding house. Mrs. Talbot told Clara she had 1 week to find somewhere else to live. The general stores started refusing to serve her. Dutch was the only one who stood by her, letting her keep her cleaning job and defending her when men got too bold in the saloon. But even Dutch had limits. You need to understand something, he said one night after closing. I like you, Clara. You're a hard worker, and you don't deserve this. But if I keep defending you, they'll turn on me too, and I've got a business to run. I understand, Clara said quietly. I'm not throwing you out, Dutch continued, but I can't fight your battles anymore. You're on your own. Clara nodded. She'd been on her own her whole life anyway. The breaking point came on a Wednesday. Clara was walking to the saloon for her weekly cleaning job when a group of women blocked her path. 6 of them, led by Mrs. Brennan and a sharp-featured woman named Caroline Hart, who ran the town's only dress shop. We need to talk, Caroline said. Clara's stomach sank, but she kept her voice level. About what? About you leaving town. I'm not leaving. Caroline's smile was thin and cruel. Yes, you are. We've taken a collection, enough money to get you on the next stage out of here. You take it, you leave, and everyone's happy. I'm not taking your money. Then we'll make your life so miserable you'll leave anyway, Mrs. Brennan said. You think it's bad now? We're just getting started. Clara looked at the 6 women surrounding her. They meant it, every word. What did I ever do to you? Clara asked. Any of you? I came here looking for work, nothing more. You embarrass us, Caroline said flatly. You make this whole town look bad. A woman like you, living here, working here, acting like you belong. It's disgusting. A woman like you. Clara had heard those words her whole life, from her father, from her uncle, from every town she'd ever set foot in. She was tired of hearing them. No, Clara said. Caroline's expression hardened. No? I'm not leaving. I found work. I'm paying my way, and I'm not breaking any laws. You don't get to drive me out just because you don't like looking at me. You think you have a choice? Mrs. Brennan stepped closer. We'll get you evicted. We'll make sure no one sells you food. We'll make sure every man in this town knows you're available. We will destroy you. Then do it, Clara said, her voice shaking but firm. But I'm still not leaving. She pushed past them, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Behind her, Caroline's voice rang out. You'll regret this. Clara didn't look back. That night she lay in bed and tried to figure out what to do. Mrs. Talbot had already told her she had 3 days to leave the boarding house. The general store had banned her. The dress shop wouldn't serve her. Even the church, not that Clara had attended, had made it clear she wasn't welcome. She had Saturday's supply run payment in her pocket. $5. It wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough. Clara was almost asleep when she heard the knock. She got up, confused, and opened the door to find Rowan Mercer standing in the hallway. He looked uncomfortable, out of place in the narrow boarding house corridor, like a wolf trying to fit into a chicken coop. What are you doing here? Clara asked. Dutch sent word about what happened, with the women. Rowan's expression was hard. I came to make you an offer. What kind of offer? Come live at the cabin, permanently. Clara's breath caught. What? You need a place to stay. I need help with the trap line and maintaining the cabin. His voice was matter-of-fact, businesslike. You'd have your own space. I'd pay you fair wages, and you'd be away from this place. People would talk. People are already talking. At least this way you'd be safe. Clara stared at him. You're serious? I don't joke about things like this. Why would you do this for me? Rowan met her eyes. Because watching them tear you apart makes me sick. And because I think you'd be good at mountain life. You're strong enough for it. It was insane, scandalous, social suicide. It was also the best offer Clara had ever received. When? She asked. Saturday, after the supply run. Bring whatever you want to keep. Leave the rest. Clara nodded slowly. Okay. Okay? Yes, I'll do it. Something that might have been relief crossed Rowan's face. Good. I'll see you Saturday. He left as quietly as he'd arrived. Clara closed the door and leaned against it, her whole body shaking. She was really doing this. Leaving town, moving into the mountains, burning every bridge behind her. But for the first time since arriving in Ash Hollow, she felt like she could breathe. Saturday morning, Clara packed her single trunk with everything she owned. It didn't take long. A few dresses, some books, personal items, the rifle Rowan had given her. Mrs. Talbot watched from the doorway, her expression sour. Running off to be that man's mistress, I suppose. I'm going where I'm wanted, Clara said, which is more than I found here. She dragged the trunk downstairs and outside where Rowan was waiting with Molly and a second horse. The street wasn't empty. People had gathered to watch her leave. Some looked satisfied. Others looked hungry for one last piece of gossip to chew on. Caroline Hart stood front and center, her smile sharp. Finally doing the decent thing and leaving? Clara looked at her, at all of them. These people who had judged her, mocked her, tried to break her. I'm not leaving because of you, Clara said clearly. I'm leaving because I found something better. She let Rowan help her secure the trunk, then mounted the horse he'd brought for her. As they rode out of town, Clara didn't look back once. The mountain trail didn't seem as frightening this time. Maybe because she wasn't alone. Maybe because she was riding towards something instead of running away. When they reached the cabin, the sun was high and warm. Rowan helped her unload her trunk and carried it inside. "The cabin's small," he said, "but we can build you a separate space, a lean-to addition maybe, give you privacy." "That would be good." Rowan showed her around properly this time. The garden where he grew vegetables, the smokehouse, the trapline roots, the creek where he got water. "You'll learn all of it," he said. "Takes time, but you're tough. You'll manage." That night, Clara slept in the cabin while Rowan slept outside, same as before. But this time it felt different. This time it wasn't temporary. This was home now. And standing at the cabin window, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the stars, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Free. The first week in the mountains nearly broke Clara all over again, just in different ways. Rowan woke her before dawn that first morning, his knock on the cabin door sharp and businesslike. Clara stumbled outside to find him already dressed, rifle slung over his shoulder, 2 canteens filled and waiting. "We're checking the trapline," he said. "Grab your rifle and keep up." The trapline stretched for miles through dense forest and rocky terrain. Rowan moved through it like he was part of the landscape itself, reading signs Clara couldn't even see. A broken branch here, disturbed leaves there, tracks in the soft earth that told him what animals had passed and when. Clara tried to keep up, but her legs burned within the first hour. Her lungs screamed. Twice she slipped on loose rocks and barely caught herself. Rowan didn't slow down, didn't offer sympathy, just kept moving, checking traps, resetting them, skinning the animals they'd caught with efficient, practiced movements. By the time they got back to the cabin, Clara's entire body was shaking with exhaustion. "Tomorrow we do it again," Rowan said. "Day after that, too. You'll get stronger." He was right, but it took weeks. Weeks of waking up so sore she could barely move. Weeks of blisters that bled and calluses that formed and broke and formed again. Weeks of learning to read the forest the way Rowan did, to move quietly, to understand the rhythms of the mountain. But slowly, something changed. Her legs stopped screaming. Her lungs adapted to the thin air. Her hands grew hard and capable. She learned to skin a rabbit in under 2 minutes, to identify edible plants, to predict weather by watching the sky. Rowan taught her everything without patience or praise, just steady expectation. He showed her once, maybe twice, then expected her to know it. When she failed, he'd grunt and show her again. When she succeeded, he'd nod and move on to the next thing. It should have been frustrating. Instead, Clara found it liberating. No pity, no lowered expectations, just the assumption that she could do hard things if she worked at it. One morning, about 3 weeks in, Clara woke to find Rowan already outside working on something. She dressed and went to investigate. He was building a lean-to addition to the cabin, just like he'd promised. The frame was already up, solid pine logs notched and fitted together with the precision of someone who'd done this before. "You started without me," Clara said. "You were sleeping." "I could help." Rowan glanced at her, then gestured to a pile of smaller logs. "Those need to be stripped and cut to length, 2 feet each. I need about 40 of them." Clara grabbed the draw knife and got to work. They built the addition together over the next week, working in the comfortable silence that had become their default. The lean-to wasn't large, maybe 8 feet by 10, but it had a real door, a window, and enough space for a bed, a small stove, and Clara's trunk. "It's perfect," Clara said when it was finished. Rowan shrugged. "It'll keep you warm. That's what matters." That night, Clara slept in her own space for the first time in months. It was small and simple in hers, and she slept better than she had since leaving home. Life settled into a rhythm after that. Up before dawn, check the trapline, return for a quick meal, then spend the afternoon on whatever needed doing, chopping wood, maintaining equipment, preserving food, repairing the cabin. Evenings were for cleaning weapons, mending clothes, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from honest work. They didn't talk much. Rowan wasn't a talker. But the silence between them felt full instead of empty, punctuated by small exchanges that mattered more than long conversations ever had. "Hand me that saw." "Coffee's ready." "Watch your footing here. Rock's loose." "Good shot." It was enough. But Ash Hollow wasn't done with them. The trouble came on a cold October morning when Clara was working in the garden, pulling the last of the root vegetables before the first hard freeze. She heard horses before she saw them, multiple riders coming up the trail. Clara straightened, wiping dirt from her hands. Rowan was inside working on a new trap mechanism. She should tell him, but something made her wait, watching as 5 riders emerged into the clearing. Her Uncle James was in front. Behind him, the sheriff, a heavy-set man named Porter, and 3 other men Clara didn't recognize, all armed. Her stomach dropped. James dismounted, his face hard. "Clara, step away from the cabin." Clara didn't move. "What are you doing here?" "We're here for your own good." James's voice was tight with something that might have been shame or anger. Clara couldn't tell which. "This has gone on long enough." "What has?" "You living up here in sin with that man." James gestured toward the cabin. "It's a disgrace. You're a disgrace, and I won't have my family name dragged through the mud any longer." The cabin door opened. Rowan stepped out, no weapon visible but his whole body radiating danger. "You need to leave," he said quietly. Sheriff Porter shifted in his saddle. "We're not leaving without the girl, Mercer." "She's not a girl, she's a woman, and she's here by choice." "That's not what we heard," one of the other men said. He was young, maybe 25, with a mean look about him. "We heard you're keeping her up here against her will, corrupting her." Rowan's expression didn't change. "Then you heard wrong." "I want to hear it from her." James looked at Clara. "Tell them. Tell them he's forcing you to stay." Clara met her uncle's eyes. "He's not forcing me to do anything. I'm here because I want to be." "You don't know what you want," James snapped. "You're confused, desperate. He's taken advantage of that." "No one's taken advantage of me." "Look at yourself," James's voice rose. "Living in the wilderness like an animal, doing men's work, sleeping in his cabin." "I have my own room," Clara interrupted, "and I'm doing honest work for honest pay, which is more than I found in your town." That hit home. James's face reddened. "You're my responsibility whether I like it or not. I won't let you ruin yourself further." "I'm not your responsibility. I haven't been since you slammed your door in my face." "You little—" James took a step forward. Rowan moved between them so fast it was almost a blur. "Don't." The word was soft, but the threat in it was crystal clear. Sheriff Porter's hand dropped to his gun. "Now, Mercer, let's not do anything stupid." "Then take your men and leave." "Can't do that. We've got a legal obligation here." Porter pulled out a folded paper. "Got a signed complaint saying you're keeping Miss Whitmore here against her will and engaging in immoral activities. That gives me cause to investigate." "There's nothing to investigate," Rowan said. "She works for me. She has her own space, that's all." The young man with the mean look laughed. "Sure it is. That's why she looks like she's been rolling in the dirt with you." Clara glanced down at herself. She was wearing men's work clothes, pants and a heavy shirt, both stained with garden soil. Her hair was pulled back in a rough braid. Her hands were dirty and calloused. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who worked hard for a living. "I've been working in the garden," Clara said evenly. "Not that it's any of your business." "Everything you do is our business when you're living in sin," the young man shot back. "You're making the whole town look bad." "Then stop looking." His face darkened. "You got a smart mouth for a whore." Rowan moved. Clara barely saw it happen. One second Rowan was standing still, the next his fist connected with the young man's face with a crack that echoed across the clearing. The man went down hard, blood pouring from his nose. "Rowan, don't," Clara started. The other 2 men jumped down from their horses, going for their guns. Sheriff Porter shouted something. James backed away, hands raised. And then everything exploded. One of the men got his gun out, but Rowan was already there, grabbing the barrel and twisting it away. The gun went off, the shot going wild into the trees. Rowan drove his elbow into the man's face, and he dropped like a stone. The 3rd man had more sense. He kept his gun holstered and backed away, hands visible. "Easy, Mercer, easy." Sheriff Porter had his own gun out now, pointed at Rowan. "That's enough. Everyone just calm down." Rowan stood in the center of the clearing, breathing hard, blood on his knuckles. The young man was still on the ground, groaning. The second man wasn't moving. "You just assaulted 2 deputies, Porter said, his voice shaking slightly. "I could arrest you right now." "They called her a whore." "I don't care what they called her. You can't just—" "Yes, I can." Rowan's voice was flat, cold. This is my land. She's under my protection, and anyone who insults her answers to me. James found his voice. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're violent, unstable, and you're a coward who abandoned his own blood when she needed help, Rowan shot back. You don't get to play the concerned family member now. James's face went white with rage. I could have you arrested for kidnapping. Except I didn't kidnap anyone. No one will believe that. I believe it, Clara said, stepping forward. And my word should count for something. Your word. James laughed bitterly. You think anyone cares what you say? You're nothing. You were nothing in Ash Hollow, and you're nothing up here except his. Finish that sentence, Rowan said quietly, and I'll put you in the ground. The clearing went dead silent. Sheriff Porter holstered his gun slowly. This is getting out of hand, Miss Whitmore. Are you here against your will? No. Has Mercer harmed you in any way? No. Are you engaged in inappropriate relations with him? Clara's face burned, but she kept her voice steady. No. Porter nodded slowly. Then legally, there's nothing I can do. She's an adult making her own choices. She's being manipulated, James insisted. That's your opinion, not evidence. Porter turned to his men. Get up. We're leaving. The young man with the broken nose struggled to his feet, still bleeding. The unconscious one started to stir. This isn't over, James said, staring at Clara. You think you can hide up here, but people will talk. They'll say things that will follow you for the rest of your life. You're destroying any chance you ever had at a decent future. I never had that chance, Clara said. You made sure of that. James flinched like she'd hit him. Then he turned and mounted his horse. The riders left slowly, the injured men helping each other stay in the saddle. Sheriff Porter was the last to go. He paused at the edge of the clearing and looked back at Rowan. You made enemies today, he said. I made enemies the day I moved here, Rowan replied. This doesn't change anything. Porter shook his head and rode away. When they were gone, Clara's legs finally gave out. She sat down hard on the cabin steps, her whole body shaking. Rowan sat beside her, close but not touching. His knuckles were split and bleeding. He didn't seem to notice. I'm sorry, Clara said. For what? For bringing this to your door, for causing trouble. You didn't cause anything. They did. Rowan flexed his fingers, watching blood well up from the cuts. But your uncle was right about one thing. People will talk. This will make things worse. I know. They'll say we're living together, that we're... He trailed off. Lovers, Clara finished. They'll say we're lovers. Yeah. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Rowan said, There's a way to stop it. Clara looked at him. What do you mean? If we were married, it wouldn't be a scandal. It would be legal, proper. He was staring straight ahead, not looking at her. I could protect you better that way. Make it so your uncle and everyone else had no claim on you. Clara's heart stopped. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm saying it's an option, a practical one. Rowan's voice was carefully neutral. You need protection. I could use help up here. Permanent help. A wife would make sense. A wife, Clara repeated numbly. It wouldn't have to be. We wouldn't have to. Rowan finally looked at her, and Clara saw something raw in his eyes. I'm not asking for anything beyond what we already have, just a legal arrangement, protection, partnership. Nothing more. It was the least romantic proposal in the history of proposals. No love, no promises of happiness, just cold practicality. And Clara had never been offered anything more honest in her life. When? She asked. Rowan blinked. When what? When would we do it? You're saying yes? Are you changing your mind? No, Rowan ran a hand through his hair. I thought you'd need time to think about it. I've spent my whole life thinking about what other people want. For once, I'm going to do what makes sense. Clara met his eyes. You're right, marriage would solve a lot of problems, and I trust you more than I've trusted anyone in years. So yes, I'll marry you. Rowan nodded slowly. Okay then. Okay. They sat there for another moment, two people who'd just agreed to bind their lives together, neither one sure what happened next. Finally, Rowan stood. We'll need to go into town, get it done officially so there's no question about it being legal. When? Tomorrow. before your uncle can cause more problems. Rowan looked toward the trail where the riders had disappeared. We'll ride down at first light, find whoever can marry us, and get it done. Clara's stomach fluttered with something between fear and anticipation. What if they refuse? They won't. Rowan's expression was grim. Because if they do, I'll make it very clear that would be a mistake. The next morning, they rode down to Ash Hollow side by side. Clara wore her least worn dress and tried to braid her hair into something presentable. Rowan wore clean clothes but refused to shave, saying he wasn't going to pretty himself up for people who hated him anyway. The town square was busy when they arrived, full of people going about their morning business. Conversations stopped when they rode in, heads turned, whispers started immediately. Rowan ignored all of it. He dismounted outside a small office near the general store, the town clerk's place, and helped Clara down. Inside, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses looked up from his desk and went pale. Mercer, we need to file a marriage license, Rowan said. The clerk blinked. You... What? A marriage license, for me and Miss Whitmore here. The clerk's eyes darted to Clara, then back to Rowan. There are procedures, requirements. You can't just... What are they? Well, you need witnesses and someone authorized to perform the ceremony, and there's a waiting period. How long? 3 days. Fine. File the paperwork. We'll be back in 3 days. The clerk's hand shook as he pulled out the forms. I need information. Full names, ages, previous marriages. They provided everything. Clara Whitmore, 32, never married. Rowan Mercer, 36, widowed. The clerk wrote it all down in careful script, his pen scratching loudly in the quiet office. When he was done, he looked up nervously. The fee is $2. Rowan paid without comment. 3 days, the clerk repeated. Come back Saturday and I'll have everything ready, but you'll still need witnesses and someone to perform the ceremony. Who can do that? The judge, usually, or a minister. We have 3 churches. The judge, Rowan interrupted. Where do I find him? The clerk gave directions to the judge's house on the edge of town. Rowan and Clara left without another word. Outside, the street had filled with even more people. Clara saw Mrs. Brennan and Caroline Hart standing together, both staring with identical expressions of shock. James Whitmore pushed through the crowd, his face red. What the hell do you think you're doing? Filing a marriage license, Rowan said calmly. You can't marry her. Watch me. This is insane. You barely know each other. She's only been living with you for long enough to know it's the right choice. Rowan mounted his horse. 3 days, James, then she'll be my wife legally, and you'll have no claim on her at all. James sputtered, but no words came out. Clara climbed onto her horse, her heart pounding. She looked down at the crowd. All these people who'd mocked her, rejected her, tried to destroy her. Anyone have any objections? She asked clearly. Speak now, because in 3 days you won't get another chance. Silence. Then Caroline Hart stepped forward. This is a mistake. You're both going to regret it. Maybe, Clara said, but it'll be our mistake to make. They rode out of town while the whispers exploded behind them. The 3 days passed in a blur. Rowan went about his normal routine, checking traps, chopping wood, maintaining equipment like nothing had changed. Clara tried to do the same, but her mind kept spinning. She was going to be married to a man she'd known for barely 3 months. A man who'd made it clear this was a practical arrangement, nothing more. Was she making a mistake? Probably. But it was the first mistake that was entirely her choice. Saturday morning, they rode back down to Ash Hollow in their cleanest clothes. The judge's house was small but well kept. Judge Harrison himself was a gray-haired man in his 60s who listened to their request with skeptical eyes. You understand what marriage means? He asked. It's a legal bond, not something to enter into lightly. We understand, Rowan said. And you're both entering this willingly? No coercion? Yes, Clara said firmly. The judge looked in them for a long moment. I'll need 2 witnesses. That was the hard part. Who in Ash Hollow would stand up for them? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dutch walked into the judge's house 10 minutes later, followed by a grizzled old prospector named Finn, who'd been kind to Clara once at the saloon. Heard you needed witnesses, Dutch said gruffly. Figured I'd volunteer before someone less friendly did. Relief flooded through Clara. Thank you. The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Judge Harrison read the words from a book, his voice flat and professional. Rowan and Clara repeated their vows, simple promises to honor the legal bond they were creating. When it came time for rings, Rowan pulled two from his pocket, plain silver bands, slightly tarnished. Clara recognized them with a jolt. These were, she started. My first wedding, Rowan finished quietly. I know it's not ideal, but they're all I have. Clara held out her hand. Rowan slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Then it was Clara's turn. She took the other ring and slipped it onto Rowan's calloused hand. By the power vested in me, Judge Harrison said, I now pronounce you husband and wife. He didn't add the traditional line about kissing. Probably figured it didn't apply. Dutch and Finn signed as witnesses. The judge filed the paperwork. And just like that, Clara Whitmore became Clara Mercer. They were walking out when James appeared on the street, backed by Sheriff Porter and a handful of men. Stop right there, James called out. Rowan's hand moved to his gun. We're done here. Married, legal, and proper. You've got no grounds for anything now. I've got grounds for assault, one of the deputies from before said, his face still bruised from Rowan's fist. You attacked me unprovoked. You called his wife a whore, Dutch said from the doorway. Plenty of provocation there. That was before they were married. Doesn't matter, Judge Harrison interrupted, stepping outside. What matters is what I say happened. And I say there was a misunderstanding that got resolved without formal charges being filed. Unless you want to press this, deputy? The deputy looked at the judge, then at Rowan's cold expression, then back at the judge. No, sir, misunderstanding's been resolved. James's face was purple with rage. This is a farce. Everyone knows this marriage is a sham. It's legal, the judge said. That's all that matters in the eyes of the law. You'll regret this, James said, staring at Clara. Both of you. Clara stepped closer to Rowan, close enough that their shoulders touched. We'll take our chances. They rode out of Ash Hollow for the second time as husband and wife, leaving the whispers and the rage behind. The ride back to the cabin was quiet. Clara kept glancing at the ring on her finger, still not quite believing it was real. When they reached the clearing, Rowan dismounted and stood there for a moment, looking at the cabin like he was seeing it for the first time. Things don't have to change, he said finally. You keep your space. I keep mine. We just keep doing what we've been doing. Okay. I'm not going to... I won't expect... Rowan trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. I know, Clara said gently. This is a partnership, like you said. He nodded, relief visible on his face. Right. Partnership. But that night, lying in her lean-to while Rowan slept in the main cabin, Clara touched the ring on her finger and wondered if maybe, someday, it could become something more. She'd been called unwanted her whole life, unmarriageable, unlovable. But today, someone had stood in front of a judge and claimed her anyway. It was a start. The first month of marriage felt like walking on ice. Careful, deliberate, both of them afraid to put their full weight down in case something cracked. Rowan kept to his routines. Clara kept to hers. They worked the trap line together, ate meals across from each other at the small table, and retreated to their separate spaces when the work was done. The ring on Clara's finger was the only proof anything had changed at all. But small things started shifting in ways neither of them talked about. Rowan began making coffee for two every morning instead of just for himself. Clara started mending his clothes without being asked, patching the tears in his shirts and reinforcing the seams that took the most wear. When Clara came back from checking the snares with her hands numb from cold, she'd find the fire built up higher than usual. When Rowan worked late into the night maintaining traps, he'd discover his dinner kept warm on the stove. They were taking care of each other in the wordless way of people who'd learned not to expect kindness, but didn't know how to stop giving it anyway. November came hard and fast, bringing the first real snow. Clara woke one morning to find 3 inches of white covering everything, turning the familiar landscape into something foreign and beautiful. Rowan was already up, standing outside the cabin with his rifle, staring at something in the tree line. Clara grabbed her own rifle and joined him. What is it? Tracks. Mountain lion, probably. Big one. He pointed to the massive paw prints leading past the cabin toward the creek. Been watching the place for a few days now. Clara's stomach tightened. Is it dangerous? Everything up here is dangerous, but lions usually don't bother people unless they're desperate or protecting cubs. Rowan lowered his rifle. Still, we should be careful. Don't go anywhere alone for a while. For the next week, they moved through the forest together constantly. Rowan taught Clara to read the lion's patterns, to understand where it hunted and when. They spotted it once, a massive tawny shape moving through the trees like liquid shadow, and Rowan put a warning shot into the dirt near its feet. The lion stared at them for a long moment, amber eyes cold and assessing, then melted back into the forest. Will it come back? Clara asked. Maybe, maybe not. Depends on how hungry it gets. Rowan started back toward the cabin. Winter's hardest on the predators. When prey gets scarce, they take risks they wouldn't normally take. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Every sound outside her lean-to felt magnified. Wind in the trees, snow sliding off the roof, the distant call of an owl. She kept thinking about those amber eyes, that lethal grace. Around midnight, she gave up and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, intending to sit by the fire for a while. Rowan was already there, feeding wood into the stove. He looked up when she entered. Can't sleep? He asked. Too many noises. Yeah, it takes getting used to. He gestured to the other chair. Coffee? They sat together in the firelight, drinking coffee and not talking. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the canyon like something alive. Does it ever get easier? Clara asked finally. Being afraid? Rowan was quiet for a moment. You learn to live with it. Fear keeps you sharp up here, keeps you alive. It's when you stop being afraid that you make mistakes. Were you afraid when you first came here? Terrified. He stared into his cup. I'd lost everything that mattered. Came up here thinking maybe the mountain would finish what grief started. But then I survived the first winter, and the second, and somewhere along the way I stopped wanting to die and started wanting to live. It was the most he'd ever said about his past. Clara wanted to ask more, about his wife, about the baby, about what it felt like to lose them both. But something in his expression stopped her. I'm glad you survived, she said instead. Rowan looked at her, firelight catching in his eyes. Me too. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things neither knew how to say. Then Rowan stood and added more wood to the fire. Try to get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Storm's coming. The storm hit 2 days later with a violence that shocked Clara even after weeks in the mountains. Wind screamed through the canyon, driving snow sideways in sheets so thick she couldn't see the tree line from the cabin door. The temperature dropped so fast that water left in buckets froze solid within an hour. They were trapped inside for 3 days. The cabin felt smaller with both of them in it constantly. Clara tried to give Rowan space, staying in her lean-to as much as possible, but the addition wasn't insulated as well as the main cabin, and the cold drove her back to the fire repeatedly. Rowan never complained. He just moved over, making room, finding small tasks to keep them both occupied. He taught Clara to make better knots for the trapline. She taught him a card game her father had shown her years ago. They played for matches, keeping score with scratches on a piece of scrap wood, and Clara won more often than she lost. You're cheating, Rowan said after she won the 5th game in a row. I'm lucky. Nobody's that lucky, Clara grinned. Maybe you're just bad at cards. Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Rowan's mouth. Deal again. On the 3rd night, the fire started dying down and they were running low on wood. The storm was still raging outside, but they needed more fuel or they'd freeze. I'll get it, Rowan said, pulling on his heavy coat. I'll help. You don't need to... The woodpile's buried. You'll need someone to dig while you carry. Clara was already putting on her own coat. Let's go. They tied a rope between them so they wouldn't get separated in the whiteout and fought their way to the woodpile. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked Clara off her feet. Snow stung her face like needles. She couldn't feel her fingers within minutes. But they worked together, Clara digging through the snowdrift while Rowan loaded wood into a canvas sling. When they had enough, they fought their way back to the cabin, following the rope hand over hand. Inside they stood dripping and shivering, surrounded by puddles of melting snow. Rowan started pulling off his wet coat. That was stupid. We should have waited. We'd have frozen. We almost froze anyway. But he was looking at her with something that might have been approval. Good work out there. You too. They changed into dry clothes and built up the fire. Clara made soup from dried venison and vegetables while Rowan organized the new wood supply. The cabin slowly warmed, and the feeling returned to Clara's fingers in painful prickles. Later, after they'd eaten and the storm was still howling outside, Rowan pulled out a small book from a shelf Clara had never paid attention to. "What's that?" she asked. "Nothing. Just something I've been working on." But he held it out anyway. Clara took it carefully. The pages were filled with sketches, detailed drawings of plants, animals, landscapes. They were good. Really good. "You drew all these?" "When I have time." Rowan looked embarrassed. "Helps me think." Clara turned the pages slowly, studying each sketch. A pine marten caught mid-leap, a cluster of wildflowers. The view from the ridge above the cabin. And near the back, a sketch of a woman working in a garden, her profile turned toward the sun. Clara's breath caught. The woman was her. "When did you draw this?" she asked quietly. "A few weeks ago. You were pulling carrots. The light was—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Anyway, it's just practice." Clara stared at the drawing. He'd captured her in a moment she didn't even remember, but looking at it now, she could feel the warmth of that afternoon sun, the satisfaction of good work, the peace she'd found in this hard place. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's just a sketch." "No, it's more than that." Clara closed the book carefully and handed it back. "Thank you for showing me." Rowan took the book and put it away, his movements stiff with self-consciousness. But the rest of the evening, Clara caught him glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking, and something warm unfurled in her chest. The storm finally broke on the fourth day. They dug themselves out and assessed the damage. Part of the lean-to roof had caved under snow weight, and several traps would need to be reset. But overall, they'd survived intact. "Could have been worse," Rowan said, surveying the clearing. "Could have been better." He snorted. Welcome to mountain life. December brought more snow and shorter days. Clara learned to navigate by starlight, to judge temperature by how the trees sounded in the wind, to predict storms by the way her joints ached. Her body grew harder, stronger, adapted to the constant physical demands in ways she'd never imagined possible. But the isolation wore on her in unexpected ways. Weeks would pass without seeing another human face besides Rowan's. The silence was profound, beautiful sometimes, suffocating others. She'd catch herself talking to Molly the mule just to hear a voice, even if the only response was a skeptical ear flick. Rowan noticed. He was too observant not to. One evening, he set a small wrapped bundle on the table in front of her. "What's this?" Claire asked. "Open it." Inside was a harmonica, old but well-maintained. Clara looked up, confused. "I don't know how to play." "I'll teach you." Rowan pulled out another harmonica from his pocket. "Used to play a bit, before. Figure it'd be good to have some music up here." So they sat by the fire, and Rowan taught Clara to play. She was terrible at first, producing sounds that made even patient Molly shake her head in dismay. But Rowan was patient, showing her the basic scales, teaching her simple songs. After a week, she could manage O Susanna without making it sound like a dying cat. After 2 weeks, they could play simple harmonies together. The music filled the cabin with something besides silence and wind, and Clara found herself looking forward to their evening practice sessions more than she wanted to admit. One night, after they'd finished playing and Clara was putting away her harmonica, Rowan spoke quietly. "I was afraid this would be a mistake. The marriage." Clara's hand stilled. "Was it?" "No." He was staring into the fire, his profile sharp in the firelight. "It's the best decision I've made in years, and I wanted you to know that." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm glad I said yes. Even though it's hard up here? Especially because it's hard. I'd rather struggle in a place where I'm wanted than survive in a place where I'm not." Rowan looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw something raw in his expression. "You're wanted here, Clara. Don't ever doubt that." The words settled into her chest, warm and solid. They didn't talk about it again. But something shifted after that night. The ice they'd been walking on started to feel more like solid ground. Christmas came and went without fanfare. Neither of them were religious, and celebrations felt hollow when it was just the two of them. But Rowan surprised Clara by making a small carved figure of a rabbit and leaving it on her pillow. Clara gave him a new leather sheath she'd made for his hunting knife, the stitching tight, and even after weeks of secret work. They didn't make a big deal of it, just exchanged the gifts over morning coffee and went about their day. But Clara kept the carved rabbit on the shelf by her bed, and Rowan wore the new sheath every day. January brought a cold snap so severe that even Rowan looked worried. The temperatures dropped so low that spit froze before it hit the ground. They burned through wood faster than they could replace it, and the trap line became too dangerous to check daily. They were stuck inside again, rationing supplies and trying to keep warm. One night, Clara woke to find ice forming on the inside of her lean-to walls. Her breath plumed white in the air. Even wrapped in every blanket she owned, she was shivering so hard her teeth rattled. She tried to tough it out, tried to wait for morning. But when she couldn't feel her feet anymore, she finally gave up and stumbled into the main cabin. Rowan was feeding the fire, wearing his heavy coat even inside. He took one look at her and swore. "How long have you been freezing in there?" "I'm fine." "You're blue. Get over here." He pulled her close to the fire and wrapped an extra blanket around her shoulders. But even with the fire and the blanket, she couldn't stop shaking. "The lean-to's not insulated well enough for this," Rowan said grimly. "You can't sleep out there tonight." "I'll be okay." Clara." His voice was firm. "You'll freeze to death. You're sleeping in here." "Where?" He gestured to his bed in the corner. "There. I'll take the floor." "I can't take your bed." "Then we'll share it." The words came out matter-of-fact, practical. "It's big enough for two, and body heat will help. Unless that makes you uncomfortable." Clara should have said no. Should have insisted on taking the floor herself. But her body was screaming for warmth, and the thought of crawling into a warm bed instead of shivering alone all night was too tempting to resist. "Okay," she said quietly. They arranged it with careful awkwardness. Clara on one side, Rowan on the other, a respectful distance between them, both fully clothed. But even with space between them, Clara could feel the heat radiating from his body, and her shivering finally started to ease. "Better?" Rowan asked in the darkness. "Yes. Thank you." They lay in silence for a while. Then Clara said, "Tell me about her. Your first wife." She felt Rowan tense beside her. "Why?" "Because you never talk about her. And I think maybe you should." The silence stretched so long Clara thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "Her name was Sarah. We met in Missouri. She was a school teacher, smart as hell, way too good for someone like me. But she married me anyway." His voice was low, rough. "We came west looking for a fresh start. She wanted adventure. I wanted to build something that mattered, and for a while we had it. We were happy." "What happened?" "She got pregnant. We were terrified and excited and completely unprepared. When her time came..." He stopped, took a breath. "Something went wrong. The baby came too early. The doctor couldn't stop the bleeding. I watched them both die and couldn't do a damn thing to stop it." Clara's chest ached. "I'm sorry. I beat the doctor half to death after. Broke his jaw, 3 ribs. Would have killed him if someone hadn't pulled me off." Rowan's voice was flat, emotionless. "Ran to the mountains and figured I'd either survive or I wouldn't. Didn't much care which." "But you did survive." "Yeah. And some days I still don't know if that was the right choice." Clara turned on her side to face him. In the dim firelight, she could just make out his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. "I'm glad you survived," she said, "for what it's worth." Rowan turned his head to look at her. They were close enough that Clara could see the pain in his eyes, the grief he carried like a weight. "It's worth a lot," he said quietly. Neither of them moved to close the distance between them. But lying there in the darkness, sharing warmth and old wounds, Clara felt closer to him than she'd felt to anyone in her life. When morning came, they woke tangled together. Clara's head on Rowan's shoulder, his arm around her waist, both of them unconsciously seeking warmth in the night. They separated quickly, awkwardly, but neither mentioned it. The cold snap broke 3 days later, and Clara moved back to her lean-to. But something had changed. The careful distance they'd maintained felt different now, less like safety and more like a waste. February brought word from town that shocked them both. Dutch rode up the mountain on a rare supply run. Rowan had sent payment down with a trapper passing through, and brought news along with the goods. "Your uncle's gone," Dutch said, unloading flour sacks. "James Whitmore. He left town last week, sold his place, and took off." Clara felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just emptiness. "Where'd he go?" "Didn't say. But before he left, he was drinking at the saloon, started talking about how he failed his family, how he couldn't look at himself anymore." Dutch glanced at Clara. "Said he was sorry about how he treated you." "Little late for sorry," Rowan muttered. Clara was quiet. Part of her wanted to feel vindicated, but mostly she just felt tired. Dutch continued unpacking. "There's more. Caroline Hart got caught stealing from her dress shop's suppliers. Town ran her out, and Mrs. Brennan's husband left her for a woman in Denver. The whole social scene down there is falling apart." "Good," Rowan said flatly. "That's not why I told you." Dutch straightened, looking uncomfortable. "I told you because people are starting to talk different about you two, calling it romantic, saying Clara tamed the wild mountain man with her courage, making you into some kind of story." Clara's stomach turned. "That's ridiculous." "Maybe, but it's better than what they were saying before." Dutch hefted the last sack. "Just thought you should know. The narrative's changing." After Dutch left, Clara and Rowan stood in the clearing processing the news. "Does it matter?" Clara asked. "What they say about us?" "No," Rowan said. "Let them tell whatever stories they want. We know the truth." But later that night, as Clara played a simple melody on her harmonica and Rowan sketched by firelight, she wondered if maybe the truth was more complicated than either of them wanted to admit. Because somewhere between survival and partnership, between practicality and proximity, something else had started growing. Something that felt dangerous and fragile and real. Clara caught Rowan watching her over his sketchbook, his expression unguarded and her breath caught. He looked away quickly, returning to his drawing. But his ears were red, and Clara smiled to herself. March arrived with the first hints of spring, longer days, melting snow, the return of birdsong. The trapline started producing again as animals emerged from winter dens. Life got easier in some ways, harder in others. One afternoon, Clara was checking snares near the creek when she slipped on wet rocks and went down hard, her ankle twisting beneath her. The pain was immediate and blinding. "Rowan!" she called out, trying to keep the panic from her voice. He was there in seconds, crashing through the underbrush like something wild. "What happened?" "My ankle. I can't put weight on it." Rowan knelt beside her, his hands gentle but efficient as he checked the injury. "Not broken, but it's a bad sprain. You're not walking on this." Before Clara could argue, he scooped her up like she weighed nothing. You can shut up and let me carry you," Rowan said, but there was no heat in it. He carried her all the way back to the cabin, and Clara was acutely aware of every point of contact. His arms solid beneath her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way he adjusted his grip to make sure she was comfortable. Inside, he set her on the bed and went to work wrapping her ankle with practiced efficiency. "You've done this before," Clara observed. "Sprained my own ankle more times than I can count up here. You learn." He tied off the bandage. "Stay off it for a week, maybe 2. "I can't stay off it for 2 weeks. There's work. I'll handle the work." "Rowan." "Clara." He looked up at her, and the concern in his eyes made her chest tight. "For once in your life, let someone take care of you." So she did. For 2 weeks, Rowan handled everything, the trapline, the cooking, the maintenance, all of it, while Clara sat by the fire and felt useless. But he never complained, never made her feel like a burden, just did what needed doing and made sure she was comfortable. And in the quiet moments between tasks, they talked, really talked, about their childhoods, hers full of disappointment, his full of violence, about their fears, hers of never being enough, his of losing someone again, about their hopes, hers for a life of honest work, his for peace after years of grief. "Do you think you'll ever stop missing her?" Clara asked one evening. "Sarah, I mean." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. The grief's not as sharp as it used to be. More like an old scar now. Still there, but not bleeding anymore." "Do you feel guilty for moving on?" "Sometimes." He met her eyes. "But I think she'd want me to be happy. And I am. Happier than I've been in years." Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. Because of the mountain? Because of you. The words hung in the air between them. Clara's ankle healed. Spring came in full, transforming the harsh winter landscape into something green and alive. And slowly, carefully, the distance between them continued to shrink. They stopped pretending sometime in late April. Clara couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic kiss in the rain. It happened in small increments, like snow melting off a roof. One day Rowan's hand lingered on her shoulder a beat too long. The next, Clara caught herself leaning into his warmth when they sat together by the fire. Then came the evening when Rowan reached across the table to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and neither of them pulled away. "This is probably a bad idea," Clara said softly. "Probably," Rowan agreed, but his hand stayed on her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "We said it was just practical. A partnership." "I know what we said." "So what are we doing?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment, his storm-gray eyes searching hers. "I'm falling in love with my wife, which is either the smartest or stupidest thing I've ever done, and I can't tell which." Clara's breath caught. "Rowan?" "You don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know." But Clara was already moving, closing the distance between them, her hands finding his face. When she kissed him, it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been but had been searching for her whole life. They didn't rush it. Their first night together was awkward and uncertain, full of nervous laughter and whispered questions. But they figured it out the way they'd figured out everything else, together, with patience and honesty and the kind of trust that only came from surviving hard things side by side. Afterward, lying tangled in Rowan's bed with his arm around her waist, Clara felt something she'd never felt before. Safe, wanted, loved. "I'm terrified," she admitted into the darkness. "Of what?" "That I'll wake up and this will all be gone. That it's too good to be real." Rowan tightened his hold on her. "It's real, and I'm not going anywhere." Clara believed him, and that was the most terrifying part of all. Summer came in full force, transforming the mountain into something lush and alive. The garden exploded with growth, the trapline stayed productive, and Clara and Rowan settled into their new reality with the ease of people who'd been meant for each other all along. But life on the mountain didn't get easier just because they were happy. If anything, it demanded more. One July afternoon, Clara was working in the garden when she heard Molly making distressed sounds from the lean-to shelter. She dropped her hoe and ran. The mule was favoring her left front leg, clearly in pain. Clara examined the hoof and found a deep crack running through it, probably from stepping wrong on the rocky trail. "Rowan!" she called. He came at a run, took one look at Molly's hoof, and swore. "That's bad. Real bad." "Can we fix it?" "Maybe. But you can't carry loads until it heals, which means we're down our best pack animal for at least a month." It was a disaster. Without Molly, they couldn't transport supplies efficiently. The trapline routes would take twice as long. Everything would be harder. But they adapted. They always adapted. Rowan rigged a travois to drag supplies. Clara took on more of the close range work to free him up for the long hauls. They rationed what they had and made do with less. It was exhausting, but they managed. One evening, after a particularly brutal day, Clara found Rowan sitting outside the cabin staring at the sunset. She sat beside him, their shoulders touching. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Any of this?" "Which part?" "All of it? The mountain, the isolation, me." Rowan looked at her like she'd said something crazy. "Never you. The mountain, sometimes. It's a hard life, Clara. Harder than most people could handle, and it's never going to get easier." "I know. But I'd choose it again, every time." He took her hand, rough calluses against rough calluses. "Because I'd rather have a hard life with you than an easy one with anyone else." Clara squeezed his hand. "Good. Because you're stuck with me." "Thank God for that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. And Clara thought about how far she'd come from that terrified woman stepping off the stagecoach in Ash Hollow. She'd been so desperate then, so broken by the world's casual cruelty. She wasn't that woman anymore. August brought a heat wave that made the cabin feel like an oven. They spent their days working in the early morning cool and late evening shade, hiding from the worst of the sun. Clara's garden thrived in the heat, producing more vegetables than they could eat. She spent weeks preserving everything, drying, pickling, storing for the winter they both knew was coming. One afternoon, Clara was bent over the preservation table when a wave of dizziness hit her so hard she had to grab the edge to keep from falling. "Whoa," Rowan said, suddenly beside her. "You okay?" "Fine. Just stood up too fast." But the dizziness kept happening, and then came the nausea and the exhaustion that hit her like a hammer in the middle of the day. And the way certain smells, coffee, which she'd always loved, and cooked meat suddenly made her stomach turn. It took Clara 2 weeks to admit what her body already knew. She was pregnant. The realization hit her while she was alone at the creek, washing clothes. She sat back on her heels, her hands still in the cold water, and tried to process it. A baby. She was going to have a baby. Terror and joy hit her in equal measure, so overwhelming she couldn't breathe. That night she told Rowan over dinner. Just said it straight out, no preamble. "I'm pregnant." Rowan's fork clattered against his plate. His face went absolutely white. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor, and walked to the door. Stood there with his back to her, one hand braced against the frame, his shoulders rigid. Clara's stomach dropped. "Rowan? I can't." His voice was rough, broken. "Sarah died giving birth, the baby too. I watched them both." He couldn't finish. Clara went to him, put her hand on his back. "I'm not Sarah." "I know, but that doesn't mean—" He turned to face her, and the terror in his eyes was stark. "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose you too?" "You might," Clara said honestly. "Childbirth is dangerous, especially up here, miles from any doctor, but running from it won't change anything. We could go to town, stay there until the baby comes." "No." "Clara Skeet, I'm not going back to that place. Not for this. Not for anything." She took his face in her hands. "We're going to do this here, together. And yes, it's terrifying, but we've survived everything else this mountain threw at us. We'll survive this too." Rowan pulled her close, holding her like she might disappear. "I can't lose you." "Then don't plan on it. Plan on us surviving. Plan on meeting our child. Plan on a future." He nodded against her hair, but Clara could feel him shaking. The fear didn't leave him. Over the next months, as Clara's body changed and the pregnancy became undeniable, Rowan's terror manifested in 1,000 small ways. He insisted on doing all the heavy lifting, wouldn't let her climb ladders or check the higher traps, started stockpiling medical supplies every chance he got, riding down to Ash Hollow himself to buy anything that might help during labor. Clara let him fuss because she understood. He'd watched his first wife die. That kind of trauma didn't just disappear because you wanted it to. But she also kept working, kept living, kept refusing to treat pregnancy like an illness. She just did it more carefully, listening to her body, knowing her limits. September came with the first whispers of autumn. The leaves started turning, painting the forest in shades of gold and red. Clara's belly swelled and the baby started kicking, strong, insistent movements that made her gasp and laugh and marvel. "Feel this," she said one evening, taking Rowan's hand and pressing it against her stomach. The baby kicked hard, right against his palm. Rowan's expression cracked open, wonder and fear and love all mixed together. "That's our child." "Yeah, that's our fighter." "How are you not terrified?" "I am terrified, but I'm also excited and grateful, and so in love with you and this baby that it hurts." Clara covered his hand with hers. "We're going to be parents, Rowan. Isn't that amazing?" He kissed her then, soft and desperate, and Clara tasted salt and realized he was crying. October brought the first snow and a visitor they didn't expect. Dutch rode up the mountain looking older than Clara remembered, his beard more gray than brown now. He brought supplies and news, settling into the cabin like he'd done this 100 times. "Heard you're expecting," he said, accepting coffee from Rowan. "Wanted to check in." "News travels fast," Clara said. "Small territory, people talk." Dutch studied her over his cup. "How you feeling?" "Tired. Hungry all the time. Ready for this to be over, but also terrified of it being over." Dutch chuckled. "That's about right. My wife was the same with our 3. Clara blinked. You have children? Had. Lost them and my wife to cholera about 15 years back. Dutch's expression was distant. Part of why I came west. Needed to be somewhere they'd never been. The cabin went quiet. Rowan stood at the window looking out at the snow-covered clearing. I'm sorry, Clara said softly. Me too. But that's not why I came up here. Dutch set down his cup. I came to tell you that if you need help when your time comes, there's a midwife in town now. Woman named Eleanor. She's good. I've seen her work. And she doesn't care about gossip or politics. She'll come if you need her. The trail up here is too dangerous in winter, Rowan said without turning around. Then bring Clara down before the heavy snows hit. No. Clara's voice was firm. I'm not going back to Ash Hollow. Even if it means, well, even then. She looked at Dutch. This is my home. My baby will be born here. Dutch was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I figured you'd say that. So I brought you this. He pulled a small book from his pack. It's a midwifery manual. Everything Eleanor told me might help. It's not the same as having her here, but it's something. Rowan took the book like it was made of gold. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're both alive and holding a healthy baby. After Dutch left, Rowan spent every evening studying that book by firelight. Clara would wake in the night to find him still reading, his face tense with concentration as he memorized every detail. Come to bed, she'd say. In a minute. I just need to finish this section. But Clara understood. This was how he fought his fear, with preparation, with knowledge, with the illusion of control. November brought heavier snow and the knowledge that Clara's time was approaching. The baby had dropped lower, making it hard to walk but easier to breathe. Clara's body felt strange and unfamiliar, stretched and swollen and achingly tender. Rowan became almost manic in his preparation. He gathered more firewood than they could possibly use, stocked the cabin with weeks' worth of food, boiled water and linens every other day just to have them ready, set up the bed with fresh blankets and positioned every lamp for maximum light. We're as ready as we can be, Clara told him one evening. We're not ready. We'll never be ready. Then we'll be unready together. She took his hand. Rowan, look at me. He did, and the terror in his eyes nearly broke her heart. Whatever happens, Clara said slowly, I need you to promise me something. Don't. If it comes down to a choice, you save the baby, not me. Absolutely not. Rowan, I'm not having this conversation. He pulled away from her, his whole body rigid. I'm not choosing. I'm saving both of you. That's the only option. That might not be possible. Then I'll make it possible. Clara wanted to argue, but she could see it would be pointless. So she just held him instead, and they didn't talk about it again. The contractions started on a cold December morning while Clara was making breakfast, a tightening across her belly, uncomfortable but not painful. She kept working, kept moving, knowing it might be hours or even days before things got serious. By afternoon, the contractions were stronger and more regular. Rowan noticed immediately. Is it time? I think so, but it'll be a while yet. What do you need? For you to stay calm. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, that's not happening. Clara labored through the afternoon and into the evening, pacing the cabin, leaning against walls during contractions, trying to find positions that helped the pain. Rowan stayed close, his presence steady even when his hands shook. By midnight, the contractions were coming hard and fast. Clara couldn't walk anymore, couldn't think beyond the waves of pain that consumed her. She gripped Rowan's hands and tried to remember how to breathe. Something's wrong, Rowan said, his voice tight with panic. You shouldn't be in this much pain. This is normal, Clara gasped. The book. Check the book. He did, and the fear in his face eased slightly. Okay, you're right. This is normal. The hours blurred together, pain and pressure and Rowan's voice talking her through it, reading instructions from the manual, his hand steady even when his voice shook. Then came the moment when Clara's body took over completely, an overwhelming urge to push that she couldn't fight even if she wanted to. The baby's coming, Rowan said, positioning himself to catch. Clara, you need to push. She pushed and screamed and pushed again. And then in a rush of fluid and blood and relief, the baby was born. For a terrible moment, there was silence. No crying, no movement. Clara's heart stopped. Then Rowan's hands moved quickly, clearing the baby's mouth and nose, rubbing the tiny chest, and suddenly the cabin filled with the most beautiful sound Clara had ever heard. Her baby, crying. "It's a girl," Rowan said, his voice cracking. "Clara, we have a daughter." He placed the baby on Clara's chest, this tiny, perfect, angry creature covered in blood and vernix and screaming her displeasure at the cold world. Clara wrapped her arms around her daughter and sobbed. They'd survived. Both of them. Against all odds, against all of Rowan's fears, they'd survived. Rowan cut the cord with shaking hands, then collapsed beside the bed, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with the force of his relief. "She's perfect," Clara whispered, studying every detail of her daughter's face. "Look at her. She's perfect." Rowan looked up, tears streaming down his face, and smiled. Really smiled. The kind of smile that transformed his entire face. "Just like her mother," he said. They named her Grace because that's what she was. Unearned, undeserved, a gift they'd done nothing to deserve but received anyway. The first weeks were brutal. Grace wanted to eat constantly. Clara was exhausted in ways she'd never imagined possible. Rowan barely slept, starting awake at every sound, checking constantly to make sure both of them were breathing. But slowly, they found their rhythm. Clara learned to nurse lying down so she could rest while the baby ate. Rowan took over everything else, cooking, cleaning, maintaining the trap line. And Grace, despite her rocky entrance to the world, thrived. Winter settled in hard, but inside the cabin they were warm, fed, together. One night, Clara woke to find Rowan standing beside Grace's cradle, just watching her sleep. The firelight caught his face, and Clara saw something there she'd never seen before. Peace. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Yeah." He reached down to adjust Grace's blanket with infinite gentleness. "I was just thinking about Sarah, about our first baby, and I realized something." "What?" "I'm not replacing them. Grace doesn't erase what I lost." He looked at Clara. "But she proves I can survive it, that I can love again without being destroyed by it, that life keeps going even after the worst happens." Clara got up and went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I'm proud of you." "For what?" "For choosing to live, for letting yourself be happy, for being brave enough to risk your heart again." Rowan kissed the top of her head. "I didn't have a choice. You and Grace didn't give me one." Spring came eventually, bringing Dutch back to the mountain with supplies and news. "Town's still talking about you two," he said, accepting coffee while Grace slept in Clara's arms. "But the story's changed. Now you're the brave woman who tamed the wilderness and the broken man she saved. They're telling it like some kind of fairy tale." "That's ridiculous," Rowan muttered. "Maybe, but it's changing things down there. Women are standing up more, calling out the ones who used to run everything. That whole social structure is crumbling." Dutch looked at Clara. "Whether you meant to or not, you started something." Clara looked down at Grace, this tiny person who depended on her completely, and thought about the woman she'd been a year ago. Desperate, broken, willing to ride into Killer Mountains for $5 because she had no other choice. "I didn't start anything," she said quietly. "I just refused to quit. There's a difference." "Is there?" Dutch smiled. "Because from where I'm sitting, refusing to quit when the whole world wants you to give up looks a lot like courage." After Dutch left, Clara carried Grace outside to see the spring flowers blooming across the meadow. Rowan followed, his arm around Clara's waist. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "Town, civilization, other people." Clara thought about it, really thought about it. "No," she said finally. "I don't miss the people who made me feel small. I don't miss pretending to be something I'm not. And I don't miss the constant judgment." She looked up at him. "Here, I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be. And that's enough." "More than enough," Rowan said. They stood together in the sunlight, their daughter between them, and Clara felt something she'd spent her whole life searching for: belonging. Years passed, measured in seasons and Grace's growth. She learned to walk in the spring, to talk by the following winter, to shoot by the time she was 5. She grew up wild and free, educated by her mother's books and her father's wilderness knowledge, afraid of nothing and gentle with everything. Travelers still passed through occasionally, trading news for shelter. They'd tell stories about the mountain family, the fierce trapper, the brave woman, the daughter raised among wolves and stars. The stories grew more elaborate with each telling, becoming legend. But Clara never cared about the stories. She cared about the reality. She cared about mornings waking up beside a man who'd chosen to love her every single day, about teaching Grace to read by firelight, about the garden that fed them through every winter, about the life they'd built from nothing but stubbornness and refusal to break. One evening, when Grace was 7, she asked the question Clara had been waiting for. "Mama, were you really as ugly as the town people said?" Clara and Rowan were sitting together on the porch, watching the sunset. Grace was between them, braiding grass into patterns. Clara considered lying, considered softening it, but she'd promised herself she'd never lie to her daughter. By their standards, yes, I was too big, too plain, too poor. Everything they valued, I wasn't. "That's stupid," Grace said with the absolute certainty of a child who'd never been taught to doubt her worth. "Maybe, but it's how the world works sometimes. People decide what matters, and anyone who doesn't fit gets punished for it." "Then the world is stupid," Rowan laughed. "Can't argue with that." Grace looked up at Clara with those serious gray eyes she'd inherited from her father. "But you're beautiful, Mama." Clara's throat tightened. "Thank you, sweetheart. I mean it. You're the strongest person I know, and you make the best bread, and you can shoot a rabbit at 50 yards. And Papa says you saved his life just by being brave enough to ride up the mountain." Grace ticked off each point on her fingers. "That's what makes someone beautiful, not whatever those town people thought." Clara pulled her daughter close, overwhelmed by the sheer rightness of this child. This fierce, brilliant, perfect child who'd never know what it felt like to be told she wasn't enough. "You're absolutely right," Clara said. "Being strong and capable and brave, that's what matters, not what anyone else thinks." "I know," Grace said simply, and went back to braiding grass. That night, after Grace was asleep, Clara and Rowan sat together by the fire like they'd done 1,000 times before. "We did good," Rowan said quietly. "With Grace?" "With everything. This life, this family, all of it." He pulled Clara closer. "I was dead before you came up that mountain, just going through motions, waiting for the grief to finish what it started. But you brought me back." "You saved me first," Clara countered. "Gave me work when no one else would. Saw worth in me when no one else could." "We saved each other then." Clara thought about that. About two broken people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful anyway. About how the town that rejected her had inadvertently given her everything she needed by forcing her into the wilderness. "You know what the best part is?" Clara said. "What?" "They tried to destroy me. Called me worthless, unmarriageable, a burden. Tried to shame me into disappearing, and instead, I got this." She gestured around the cabin, at the life they'd built, the family they'd created, the peace they'd found. "They thought they were punishing me, but they gave me exactly what I needed." Rowan smiled. "Freedom." "Freedom," Clara agreed, "from their judgment, from their rules, from the constant weight of never being enough." She looked at him. "I used to think there was something wrong with me, that if I could just be smaller, prettier, quieter, then maybe someone would want me. But I was asking the wrong question." "What should you have been asking? Not, how do I make them want me, but why do I want people who don't see my worth?" Clara shook her head. "Took me 32 years and a mountain to figure that out." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. "I'm glad you rode up here," Rowan said finally. "Best $5 I ever spent." Clara laughed. "Best $5 I ever earned. Think Grace will stay when she's older?" "I don't know. Maybe she'll want town life, friends her own age, society." Clara squeezed his hand. "But whatever she chooses, she'll choose it knowing she's worth something. That's more than I had. More than either of us had." The fire crackled. Outside, an owl called through the darkness. And Clara thought about all the women who'd mocked her in Ash Hollow. Where were they now? Still playing the same games, still tearing each other down, still measuring their worth by what men thought of them. While Clara had built something real, something that mattered, something that would outlast all their petty cruelties. She'd been called the unwanted woman, the ugly one, the burden. But she'd become something they could never understand. Free. The next morning, Clara woke to Grace shaking her shoulder urgently. Mama, there are people coming, lots of them. Clara and Rowan were outside in seconds, rifles ready. But the group climbing into the clearing wasn't threatening. 3 women and 2 children, all looking exhausted and desperate. The woman in front was young, maybe 20, with a black eye and split lip. The other 2 were older, both thin and scared looking.
Please, the young woman said, we heard there was a woman up here, one who got away. We need help. Clara's heart clenched. She knew that look, that desperation. What kind of help? A place to stay, just for a little while. We've got nowhere else to go. The woman's voice broke. The men in town, we can't go back. And we heard you survived up here, that you made it work.
Clara looked at Rowan. He was studying the group carefully, reading the fear and exhaustion in their faces. When he met her eyes, she saw understanding there. How'd you get up here, sir? Rowan asked. Followed the trail, took us 2 days. The woman gestured to the children, both boys, maybe 8 and 10. My sons, and these are my friends. We pooled what money we had and ran. Clara made a decision. Grace, put water on to boil. Rowan, help me set up the lean-to for guests. Over the next days, the truth came out in pieces. The young woman's husband beat her. The older women had been widowed and left destitute, preyed on by men who thought they were easy targets. They'd heard the stories about Clara, exaggerated and romanticized, but containing a core truth, and decided if one woman could survive the mountain, maybe others could too. We can't stay forever, the young woman, whose name was Beth, said on the 3rd day. We know that. But if you could just teach us, show us how to survive up here. We could find our own place, build our own cabin. Clara looked at these women, all of them broken by the world's casual cruelty, all of them desperate for a chance. And she saw herself in every single one. There's a clearing about 2 miles north, Rowan said quietly. Good water source, protected from the worst of the wind. It's on our land, but we don't use it. Clara stared at him. You're serious? Why not? It's just sitting there. And if they're willing to work, he shrugged, might be nice having neighbors. So Clara and Rowan taught them how to hunt, trap, preserve food, read weather, survive winters. Rowan showed them how to build a cabin that would hold up to mountain storms. Clara taught them which plants were edible, which were medicinal, which would kill you if you weren't careful. It was hard work. The women had never done anything like this before, but they learned because they had to. Because the alternative was going back to a world that had chewed them up and spit them out. By the end of summer, they had a small cabin built. Basic, but solid. Beth's boys were learning to set snares. The older women had started a garden. They were surviving. News of the mountain women spread. More came, some stayed, some left, but a small community began forming, women helping women, teaching each other, building something new. And Ash Hollow noticed. The town that had rejected Clara, that had tried to shame her into disappearing, started changing. Women saw that there were options beyond enduring mistreatment, that survival was possible outside the narrow rules society had set. Some of the worst men in town suddenly found themselves without the power they'd always taken for granted. The women who'd once competed for scraps of male approval started supporting each other instead. It wasn't a revolution, it was quieter than that, but it was real. And it had started because one woman refused to quit. Years later, when travelers came through and asked Clara about the mountain community, about how it all began, she never knew quite what to say. Because the truth was complicated. She hadn't set out to change anything. She'd just been trying to survive. But survival itself, when the world expects you to give up, becomes a kind of rebellion. And rebellion, even the unintentional kind, has a way of spreading. On Grace's 10th birthday, Clara took her daughter to the ridge overlooking the valley. Below, they could see their cabin, the neighboring homesteads, the smoke rising from multiple chimneys. Do you know why this matters? Clara asked, gesturing to the small community. Because we helped them? Because we proved something. Clara sat down on a sun-warmed rock, pulling Grace beside her. The world tells women like us, women who don't fit the mold, that we're worthless, that our value comes from being small and pretty and acceptable, that if we can't be those things, we might as well give up. That's stupid, Grace said loyally. Yes, but it's also powerful. Because when everyone tells you the same lie over and over, you start to believe it. Clara looked at her daughter. I believed it for a long time, thought there was something wrong with me, that I deserved the way people treated me. You didn't. No, I didn't. And neither do any of the women who came here looking for help. Clara put her arm around Grace. What we proved is that worth isn't decided by other people's opinions. It's forged through survival, through refusing to break, through building something real. Grace was quiet, processing this. Then, is that why you stayed? Even when it was hard? I stayed because going back to people who didn't want me seemed worse than anything the mountain could do. Clara smiled. But I'm glad I did, because I found your father, and I found you, and I found out who I really was underneath all the shame I'd been carrying. Who were you? Someone strong, someone capable, someone who deserved to be loved exactly as I was. They sat together in the afternoon sun, watching clouds move across the valley. Mama? Grace said after a while. Yeah? I want to be like you when I grow up. Clara's throat tightened. You're already better than me, sweetheart, because you've never had to learn that you're enough. You've always known it. Only because you taught me. And maybe that was the point, Clara thought. Maybe that was what survival was really about. Not just enduring, but creating a world where the next generation didn't have to endure the same things. Where girls grew up knowing their worth wasn't determined by how well they fit into boxes built by people who didn't matter. That evening, the mountain community gathered for Grace's birthday. 23 people now, women and children, all of them learning to thrive in this hard place. They shared food, told stories, laughed together. The children played while the adults talked about winter preparations and next year's planting. And Clara, watching her found family celebrate her daughter, felt a satisfaction deeper than anything she'd ever known. She'd been the unwanted woman, the rejected one, the burden nobody wanted to carry. But she'd become something those people in Ash Hollow could never understand. She'd become free, free from their judgment, free from their narrow definitions of worth, free from the constant weight of never being enough. And in that freedom, she'd built a life worth living, a family worth fighting for, a legacy that would outlast all their petty cruelties. Years later, when Grace was grown with children of her own, people would still tell stories about Clara Mercer, the woman who rode into the mountains with nothing and built a community, the brave one who refused to break. But Clara never cared about the stories. She cared about the truth. And the truth was this: worth wasn't something other people gave you. It was something you forged yourself, through survival, through refusal to quit, through the quiet courage of simply existing when the world wanted you gone. She'd learned that lesson the hard way, on a mountain trail that nearly killed her, from a man who'd been as broken as she was. But she'd learned it, and she'd made damn sure her daughter, and every woman who came after, would never have to learn it the same way. That was her real legacy. Not the stories, not the legend, but the knowledge, passed down, that survival itself was a form of victory. And sometimes, the woman nobody wanted became the woman nobody could break. Not because she was perfect, not because she never struggled, but because she refused to let other people's cruelty define her worth. And in the end, that made all the difference.